All right, welcome to Monito's monthly recap for February. We're switching things up a little bit, trying to keep it more relaxed and conversational. And joining me is my colleague Jan, who's got a very deep understanding of fintech, and he's been following some of the stories we'll be covering today. And there's a lot to talk about. Revolut, as usual, is dominating the news cycle. They just scrapped their weekend exchange rate fee here in the UK, which is a pretty big move. So we'll break down what that actually means for users. And on top of that, reportedly, they may be looking at an increased valuation. So this is up from 45 billion to a massive $60 billion. And for context, that would give them a bigger valuation than Barclays Bank, which is pretty wild and definitely worth a discussion. Then there's Chase UK, which has been gradually rolling out its new credit card. I finally got my hands on one, and spoiler alert, it's pretty underwhelming. I'll share my thoughts on that and why. And finally, HSBC's digital payment app ZING has already closed. It lasted around a year, and Jan and I will be digging into what went wrong and what they could have done differently. So we have a lot to discuss, and we'll try to keep this to around 30 minutes. And while this will be uploaded to YouTube, I'll also put the audio on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So for anyone that would like us to just play in your ear, not literally play in your ear, but you know what I mean, we'll have that available for you as well. But let's jump into Revolut and the weekend fee. This has been happening for a few months now across the globe, but now in the UK, I believe from April, will no longer pay a weekend surcharge for exchanging currencies. And I want to get your thoughts on this, Jan, as I remember you said on Slack that this may have been a deal breaker to why you stopped using Ultra. So if you could talk about that, I'd love to hear why. And also I found myself in the past criticizing Revolut for this fee. And it was one of the probably very few downsides to using Revolut. And now they're dropping them. It does make them an even more attractive proposition.
Yeah. So first of all, let me maybe clarify that they just dropped their weekend fee on the paid plans, which means the premium, the metal, and the ultra plan. The normal accounts, the free ones, they still will be paying the fee. And that definitely makes those paid plans more intriguing to me as well. I had the metal plan last year. And I was actually pretty satisfied with it, right? Yeah, it was especially useful for withdrawing money, right? They give you a higher allowance. And I also enjoyed using the card, right? It's made of metal, looks really sturdy. It's fun in general. But there was one big downside, and that was just the weekend fee. And in my opinion, for paid bank account, that's just unacceptable, especially if other competitors don't have that disadvantage on their free plans even. So it's a big thing, in my opinion, that they dropped the weekend fee here.
Yeah, it was quite easy to actually recommend other alternatives like Starling, for example, who wouldn't charge you on the weekend. I mean, you found yourself trying to avoid Revolut's weekend fee by exchanging currencies ahead of time on like a Friday. But that in itself, it's not really a solution. I appreciate why Revolut did it, but it's not a very attractive proposition to think that, I've got to prepare myself for a weekend fee ahead of time, and I could just use at least here in the UK, a card like Starling, which offers MasterCard's exchange rates, no fixed fees on transacting, and the MasterCard FX rate is pretty solid. It's close to the mid-market rate. It's more or less the same as Revolut. And when you've got alternatives like that, you could just recommend, as someone that reviews these products, it's too easy to say, look, you don't necessarily have to use Revolut. These different options are available and they don't charge a weekend fee. But if you get rid of that, all of a sudden you've got no real reason not to use Revolut. I mean, it's quite difficult not to recommend them, but just to play devil's advocate, Jan, this might be a bit conspiratorial, but someone might argue that, Revolut no longer use the real mid-market rate or the interbank exchange rate. They use the Revolut rate. Well, what's to say that they're not baking in these fees? Perhaps those exchange rates aren't going to be as favorable as they were before now that they've removed this weekend surcharge. Perhaps their exchange rates in general will have more of a markup. I'm not sure. Have you noticed any change or difference in their exchange rates recently? Are they worse than they were before?
Yeah, I didn't experience anything recently, but in general, it can be said that Revolut definitely includes some type of spread in their FX conversion rate. And it's typically, it depends on the currency pair, but in my experience, it's about 0.5% to 1% on average, which is quite a lot if you think about it, especially when I do purchases with my WISE card that I have done with my Revolut card before. Just as an example, using the metro system in a foreign country, right? Whenever I'm traveling with my girlfriend, she uses one card, I use the other one. and then I can see the charges and the exchange rates directly next to each other, and then it's just very obvious that the Revolut rate is a lot worse than the mid-market rate. It's still okay. You'll not lose a lot of money with it, but it's not as good as it should be. And who knows? Maybe they'll be including this loss that they're making on the weekends into their exchange rate margin. But I guess time will tell.
Yeah, that's interesting. As more pressure is exerted on them as well to be more profitable, to generate more revenue, 0.7.5 percentage increase in exchange rate margin fees aren't going to have a huge impact on customers day to day. They do and they don't. Customers don't necessarily see them or notice these changes, and it's probably quite easy to do so, and it could be quite tempting for them to do it. And nothing's free. If they've removed a fee, they've probably found a way to embed it somehow and make up for it. As a marketing move, as the optics go, it is more attractive. It does make them a more attractive proposition. I'm glad they did it. It always felt weird to me that they had it in the first place. I appreciate the reasoning because of volatility. They have to cover themselves, but it always felt like, this is just that one thing that was making it harder for them to be, recommended over something like WISE, who do charge a small fixed fee, but on the weekend, WISE always felt like the better option, at least from the comparisons that I did previously. We should probably clarify as well that the standard account holders will continue to pay a 1% surcharge. This could be a move to make those paid accounts more attractive.
Yeah, it could be. The question is, why was it there in the first place for paid accounts, right? And they were not exactly cheap, right? The metal plan, I think it was priced at 14 euros per month. At least it was the euro equivalent. Not sure what they price it in the UK. As a consumer, paying that amount of money for a bank account, I do expect excellent exchange rates, and it's just unacceptable if a free alternative is better. And I personally found myself in the past just avoiding my Revolut card on the weekend totally, or delaying bigger purchases that I had to make in foreign currencies to the week. Yeah, led to me personally just figuring out that it's not worth it, the paid plan, and that's why I canceled it.
That's interesting. You make an interesting point about avoiding using your card entirely. By doing so, well, if customers at scale are doing that, then Revolut are losing out on transaction fee that they get, and perhaps it's more lucrative for them just to make sure people are still continuing to use their cards rather than avoiding using them on the weekends to avoid that fee. Would you now, Jan, reconsider using it? Does that change your position entirely?
It could. It's definitely appealing, and I'll have to consider if I switch back to the metal plan or if I'll just stick with the standard plan for now.
You're not going to pay 15 euros, whatever it is in euros, for metal just because of the cheap exchange rate, surely.
What really made me purchase that plan in the first place was the bigger allowance on cash withdrawals. So I think the standard plan in the Eurozone has a 200 euro limit of withdrawals that you can make every month all over the world. And the metal plan has an increased limit, and I think it's 800 euros every month. So for me personally, as someone who has to withdraw quite a bit of money every month in foreign currencies, it was worth it. I made the calculation, so I might consider switching back. And obviously, there are a few other features that are also very attractive. But for me personally, that was the main argument for the metal plan.
Yeah, I found that you'd be able to speak to this better than I would, but from research, I've found that a lot of these European bank accounts aren't that good when it comes to ATM withdrawals. Like, you don't necessarily see like unlimited international ATM withdrawals. To me, that's quite interesting because from the UK, there are options available like Starling, for example, or Chase UK, where you get unlimited international withdrawals. Starling offers £300 a day internationally at the MasterCard exchange rate. It's fantastic. Strangely, I've always found that the ATM withdrawal limits or fees with European banks has been pretty poor. So I can see how Revolut could be attractive from that perspective. Is it 800 euros with metal that you get fee-free?
Yeah.
That's not bad, is it? Arguably, you could say like, well, you don't, I mean, not arguably, I think the banks themselves probably would argue that you don't necessarily need to withdraw that much money these days. Do you find yourself withdrawing that much a month?
Maybe not that much, but I think around 600 euros every month. And that's typically because I do travel around quite a lot in countries where card payments just aren't as widespread. For example, I'm in Thailand right now, and I do have to make most of my daily expenditures in cash. That's just how it's done here, and therefore I do need the cash. But there are ways to avoid the ATM totally. We might cover those in another podcast episode, but that's actually my go-to method to get cash nowadays.
Sticking with the topic of Revolut, the segue here isn't the best. I've got no real way to segue to their bumper valuation, but I'd like to jump into that while we're on the topic of Revolut and get your thoughts on this. They could potentially be worth more than Barclays if they get this $60 billion valuation. And Barclays are a huge bank here in the UK that actually ring fence a lot of Revolut's customer deposits, because Revolut aren't a fully licensed bank yet. They're an e-money institution, so they're not allowed to hold their customer deposits. And so they're ring-fenced by other banks, and one of them is Barclays, who hold a lot of the deposits of Revolut customers. And this valuation could put Revolut at more than Barclays, which is fascinating. I'm curious, Jan, to hear your thoughts on this. What could we expect to see from Revolut in the future in order to try and match up to this valuation? How are they going to generate more revenue? How are they going to get more customers? 50 million is already a huge amount of customers. It puts them in the position of one of the biggest banks in the world, but they don't generate the type of revenue as some of the biggest banks in the world. So what are they going to do to match that valuation?
All of those valuations of fintech companies are typically built on the assumption of continuous high growth, right? So Revolut, which has been growing incredibly well in the past, if they fail to sustain this growth rate, then the valuation will drop very fast as well. So I'm not exactly sure what investors expect. Obviously, that's something that investors know best. I guess if the pre-tax profit doesn't grow as much as they want it to be, it will be the valuation will drop for sure. And Barclays and other high street banks, typically they make the majority of their profit in investment banking. That's how they can generate such large amounts of money. And at least for the German banks, the typical private customer business is sometimes even unprofitable.
You're absolutely right. It's like you've got 50 million customers, but they don't seem to be generating a huge amount of profit. So what are they going to do?
And just in comparison, Barclays generated a profit of $10 billion in 2024. So that's 10 times as much as Revolut. Now imagine what the growth rate must be in order to justify this.
I mean, how many customers do Barclays have? Barclays has 48 million customers and clients worldwide. Each individual customer is worth so much more to Barclays than they are to Revolut. Because I think a lot of people have opened Revolut accounts and just checked out the app and not, had maybe a little bit too much fear to deposit money, significant money, and then just kind of used it just whenever they travel. And I think one of the things Revolut will probably be looking to do, particularly in the UK, if they get, when I'm sure they will get fully approved, or be looking at how they can take the inactive customers that they have and get them to properly treat their app as a bank account. Because if you look at 48 million customers at Barclays, 10 billion, was that dollars?
$10 billion, yeah. I think it's 8 billion pounds. Profit before tax, yeah.
Profit before tax, yeah, versus Revolut's last report of about $500 million.
It's 1 billion profit before tax that Revolut is expecting to achieve now. In 2024, yeah.
Nice.
I'm not sure if they've posted it already, but
but if they did do that, that would be very impressive, and that's obviously one of the things that's driving this valuation. But it still doesn't really make sense.
Something to keep in mind, Jonny. We're now in an era of high interest rates, right? The last few years have been incredibly beneficial for banks, because they could just deposit their money with the central bank, or their customers' monies, and then they would earn an interest on that. Almost all banks, they've just grown incredibly well. And now, as interest rates are falling, it's going to be even more difficult to keep this growth this growth rate.
That's a good point. I think a large percentage of their pre-tax profit came from interest on deposits. And that will be very, very interesting to see as interest rates start to decline, how companies like Revolut are able to counter the negative impact that'll have on their balance sheet. Hopefully the timing of getting the license here in the UK will coincide quite nicely with that, because they'll be able to introduce lending products, which will be able to generate more income. Speaking of lending products, speaking of credit cards, we have a Chase UK credit card here. There's nothing really to it though. It's relatively underwhelming when you look at the fanfare that JP Morgan Chase started with, this huge 1% cashback offering. They drew a lot of people in. I think the credit card had high expectations. Would it be like a rewards credit card? Would it offer cashback? Would we be able to collect points? But there's nothing really to it. You get 0% interest for 18 months, which is okay. But there are competitors like Barclays Card, which offer 23 months, and Lloyds, which offer 21 months. You know, you could argue that, well, okay, you could spend that £4,000, get 0% for 18 months, and then put that £4,000 in a savings account that you would have otherwise spent, but you use your credit card, and then get the interest from that. And that could be like your reward, but that's not good enough, in my opinion. And if you look at competitors of theirs now in the credit card market, like Amex or even Barclays Card, the Avios card, for example, there are some rewarding cards here in the UK. And I just don't feel like this has much to offer. It could be the beginning of the end of Chase's generosity. You know, they've spent millions of dollars on this account and card. They've done an incredible job of getting lots of customer deposits, getting lots of attention, ranked arguably one of the best cards and accounts in the UK. And now they don't necessarily need to offer huge rewards to draw people in. Plus, you're already a customer. If you've got the credit card, you already got an account. So it's quite disappointing. I won't actually probably use this. You do get good international spending benefits, no fixed fees on international spending. It's okay. You get MasterCard's exchange rates. That's okay. But there are plenty of other credit cards that are offering that. Although a lot of the rewards credit cards like Amex and the Barclays card, Avios card, they do charge 3% on foreign transactions. So I just wanted to share that with you. I don't think this is that impressive. And I do think it's a misstep from Chase UK. If they want to compete in the credit card market here in the UK, I think they need to be offering something better than just another 0% interest card. Let's move on to ZING. Yeah, and ZING is in the UK, so I assume that you've got very little experience with ZING.
I've heard about it, but I obviously don't have an account with them because I don't reside in the UK.
Tell me where you reside while I look for my ZING card.
Yeah, it's a complicated topic. I do have various residencies in several countries, and I'm living a very global lifestyle. One of those countries being Panama, but I typically do travel quite a lot. So one could say I reside everywhere.
Where is your main wealth, so to speak, deposited? Is it with a German bank account?
That's actually US based, most of my assets.
Okay, that's definitely a different podcast. Okay, so we'll move on from that, but we could definitely talk about that. I'd be very interested to know more about that.
Yeah, we should. Yeah.
Yeah. So ZING, this was the card. I don't know if I've ever done this. I got the card ready to do an unboxing experience, to review the account, and I don't think I've ever done that. It sounds fantastic. So ZING, HSBC's attempt at rivaling WISE and Revolut at the end of January, they didn't make it. They ceased to exist. Suppose I can show you the back of the card now, because there's absolutely zero funds in there. I didn't even get a chance to do a review, and I had earmarked one as well for early this year. I just basically waited to review the product because I wanted to give it the opportunity to release new features. Because when it launched, I think I could have made a video about it, but it wouldn't have been more than a few minutes long. There wasn't a huge amount to discuss, and I think here lies the problem. There wasn't really anything to this. You know, they offered pretty much the mid-market rate with a small fee on top, but that was it. They didn't offer anything unique compared to Monzo or Revolut, and it felt like they just rebranded HSBC with a flashy app, literally a flashy app. It's called ZING, and they didn't offer anything else beyond that. I think that's really where they went wrong. They just weren't able to differentiate themselves. Why would you make the change? Why would you go through the onboarding process? Although it was quick, I think it took about 2.5 minutes to get onboarded and get the card in my Apple wallet. It was about 2.5 minutes. I timed it. It was ridiculous. I'm not then going to go and deposit money into ZING over Revolut or over WISE. Possibly I could have used ZING at the weekend instead of Revolut as my weekend spending card, but that wouldn't even work nowadays as well.
Better alternatives in the UK. Starling, as you mentioned in the past. So what's even the reason for them to exist with this kind of offering? It just doesn't make sense from my perspective.
I mean, look, JP Morgan, like the legacy bank, have managed to pull this off with Chase UK, but that is an actual bank. Why didn't they get licensed? Why didn't they get a licensed bank? They should have just copied Chase UK and done a licensed bank with, good, favorable international spending exchange rates, use MasterCard's exchange rates or Visas, have no fixed fees, have no fees on ATM withdrawals, and just offer a digital bank. I could just use Chase UK instead of ZING. Why? It doesn't make any sense. It didn't really make any sense. Like, why? And that's just £150 million. It was good to talk to you, Jan. You're in Thailand, still, right?
I'm in Thailand currently, yeah.
Excellent. Well, maybe next time we talk, you'll be in Japan. If I remember rightly, you're heading there next.
Yeah, I'll be heading there next. Correct.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Jonny, and this has been Jan, and we'll see you soon.